Hey there, good morning. My name is Jennifer Turner. We're a small group, but I heard there was some traffic problems out on the road today, and we all know Metro, so more. Oh, good, I got more volume too. And do come to the table. Don't sit off on the sides there, you guys. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. I have a few new folks here today, I know. The Wilson Center, we were created in 1968 by Congress as a memorial to good old Woodrow Wilson. And in his spirit, we have about 20 projects and programs here that put on meetings. We are a meeting machine in Washington, D.C., over 700 meetings a year, and only 4 meeting rooms, so do the math. And we focus on foreign policy issues. And, of course, we've got regional programs, and then there are funny little programs like mine that was created 13 years ago, called the China Environment Forum, to hone in on China's energy and environmental challenges. And I've been here 11 years now, woohoo! And every meeting you come to, I will be saying that fact. My people, frequent feeder here who comes, always hears me. And of course, yes, and she should actually Helen here, who comes to every meeting, she always likes it when I mention that Woodrow Wilson is our only PhD president. Mm-hmm. So that could change, you know. Got some PhD candidates in the room here, right, working on that. So yeah, and so we've, for people who come regularly, you know that for the past year we've been doing tons of meetings on energy and climate issues because we have a grant called Cooperative Competitors. Today we're shifting gears a little bit to focus more on my other big grant, which also supports cooperative competitors. USAID gave Vermont Law School a grant, continuation grant, I think it's in its 4th year, to look at environmental governance issues. And we've been helping them when they bringing scholars or lawyers in to D.C., our publications, we're doing some things on environmental governance. But one of the topics they also wanted us to focus on was China's ecological footprint in Southeast Asia and beyond. And in case, just so you know, that's the theme of today's meeting. So if you want to make sure, this is why you're here. And I'm actually, before I introduce the speakers and stuff, I'd actually like to ask Adam, did I try to say your name right? Moser. Adam Moser. I'm so embarrassed. My colleague at Vermont Law School, who's I never see, so I can't remember his name. To just say a couple words about what Vermont Law School is doing, because I feel like a lot of people don't really know what your in China program's about.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. So, yes, Adam Moser, Vermont Law School, and at Vermont Law School we have the U.S.-China Partnership for Environmental Law, and we are well into our 4th year, moving into 5th year quite quickly, of our grant and of the program there. We partner with law schools, NGOs in China.
No, I'm gesturing that woman's
gesturing
the table.
Okay. We partner with law schools, NGOs in China, and work with government ministries through them. On the China's eco-footprint abroad, on that front, we've been doing research on actual impacts and policy suggestion work for well over a year now, targeting EIA's environmental impact assessments in some of these host countries and how we can influence that, and then trying to target actors within China on CSR and just responsibility when they're going abroad and so forth. So, yep.
That's good. And so today's meeting, because in all honesty, you know, this is still, I've had a few meetings on this topic over the last couple of years, but I still have always felt that I don't really get it. It's a very complex issue, which is why the title of the meeting is called Complex Connections. And we're going to start off with Xiaomei Tan. I'm going to move to this one. We're going to start off with Xiaomei Tan. Just a minute. I need my AV folks to make sure I got volume. Okay. Yes. She's like, no, I'm continuing. So we're going to start off with Xiaomei Tan, who is going to give us kind of a primer. She only has 9 slides. So if you take out the title, it's 8, which is a lucky number in Chinese. So this is good. Because I mean, there are a few of you in the room who I think work in this area, but I think there's a lot of confusion. You know, people say China's ecological impact on Southeast Asia, and we're picturing the Chinese government is going out there and investing, but there are many actors, and who it is in the government, and but it's also not just China. And that's what we're going to learn about when we get to our case studies. We have Swana Gauntlet, who is actually the catalyst for this meeting. Initially, Michael Zwirn from Wildlife Alliance contacted me about possibly holding a meeting, And we got to talking, and suddenly, the karmic forces came together, and we have a nice panel of 4 folks here talking about this. So Swana, she's the founder and chief executive officer of Wildlife Alliance, and she's designed and implemented and supported conservation programs to save wildlife from extinction around the world, focusing a lot on Southeast Asia. Now, they don't just save animals. They're looking at ecosystems and also, very importantly, working with communities. And if you're working in Southeast Asia, the international investments, extractive resources industries there are having a huge impact. So that's why that's also become a part of their programming. So Sawana's going to talk a bit about some of the hydro investments in Cambodia. And then we get another case study. We were looking around after we grabbed Sawana, right? We got to find someone to talk about trees. So, of course, I emailed Forestry Trends because it's in their title that they do trees, right? Where are my Forestry Trends people here today? There must be someone here. Oh, not yet. They're coming. So, and then we imported a Canadian, Keith Barney, who's a doctoral candidate at the Department of Geography at York University. But he's not your average PhD. Well, I don't know. You're working. Seems like you're working full-time, which is why it takes longer.
That's right.
So you have an excuse. I didn't have as much excuse. I was supposedly just working on my dissertation. But he's been doing consulting work with Forest Trends, WWF, Forest Rights and Resources Initiative, looking at the timber trade issues and more. It's complex, which is, he actually inspired me for the title, too. Did you know that? You inspired me to talk about complexity. So he's going to be talking about forestry trade issues, but that it's not just China. It's a lot of different actors, regional, global markets. And so, now you'll be a PhD soon, but you can make order out of complexity for us, right? Okay.
Not
So he will.
complexity.
Yeah, it's hard. When you're in dissertation, you want to make everything complex. Okay, and then last but not least, Rose Neo. Up on the panel here, I've known her the longest, mainly through email. And what was funny is that when she moved to D.C. a couple years ago, I still only talked to her on email. And I finally thought that this was ridiculous. So the best thing to do is invite her to speak at my meeting, and I can see her. She's now, I initially met her, she was at TNC in China for many years, down in Yunnan. But now she's over at WWF. And she's going to close us out today, talking again, giving us a little bit also, continuing that kind of primer on China's ecological footprint, understanding the breadth of it, and then talk about a couple of WWF's programs that are also working to kind of address this financial flows and build the capacity of the actors in China to not be so destructive, I guess. All right. Are you guys, and I think that we are kind of a small crowd today. Would you guys, you won't be opposed. I'm going to pass the mic, and I'd like you just to say your name and affiliation real quick, because wouldn't you guys like to know who's out there? Yes. Yeah? Okay, just real quick.
I'm Helen Rafael, Resources for the Future.
Adadana Ashbury, Yale University.
Hi, I'm Don Sladkin. I'm kind of helping out with Wildlife Alliance.
Okay.
Michael Zwern, Director of U.S. Operations at Wildlife Alliance.
Adam Moser, Vermont Law School.
Danny Dresner, interning at Wildlife Alliance.
Julianne Diamond, Wildlife Alliance.
John Malloy, Wildlife Alliance.
Monty Martin, no affiliation.
But you could be Wildlife Alliance.
I'm Hannah Marksey. I'm Wildlife Alliance and ECSP at Wilson Center.
Hi, I'm Laura Quist, and International Fund for Agricultural Development.
Kristen Canby from Forest Trends.
Ah, there's my Forest Trends person. Oh, and she's...
Maria Hatziolos, the World Bank.
I'm Julian Kachanoff. I'm with the State Department.
Hey, great. Just pass it straight across.
Zoya Pell, no affiliation.
Morning, everyone. Virginia Cutchin with Transition Success Consulting.
Stephanie Searle, University of Canterbury.
Gilad, Wildlife Alliance, Cambodia.
You're not doing the tribal behavior thing. You should be over there. Yeah.
Good morning, Desmond.
Oh, Cambodian, okay.
Desmond Lim, Earth Rights International.
Okay.
Kim McPhail, Asia America Initiative.
Kelly Usher, Asia America Initiative.
Okay, and I want to introduce, I have Pete Marsters here, my assistant, and then Kushing Liu, who's my research assistant. Okay, all right. No, I'm good. All right, now these people, you will start. Yes. Okay. You all will speak intelligently and succinctly, and then they will quiz you. They seem like a nice lot, but I do want hardballs later. All right.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My presentation will provide a broad picture of China's overseas investments. Its trend in the past 10 years, who are the major players, what's the decision-making process, and how can we engage with China. So, in the past, we can see from this graph, in the past 5 years, China's overseas investment has increased dramatically. In 2009, China's total ODI accounted for 5.1% of global annual ODI and ranks first among developing countries and ranked fifth across the world. So China is becoming a major overseas investor globally. What are the major sectors that China's overseas investment focus on? The number one, the largest sector is leasing and business services. That's mainly focused in Hong Kong, Singapore. Second largest sector is financing. Third is wholesale and retail service. What caused the international media most interest is China's investor in energy and mining in developing countries. So if we look at the right graph, right figure, we can see that China's investment in mining and power, natural gas, and water resources has fluctuated a lot in the past 4 years, from 2005 to 2008. We can see that in 2006, a large portion of China's overseas investment focused on mining, mainly in Africa. Because of lots of international criticism, recent years, the investment in mining has decreased a little bit, but investment in power, mainly infrastructure related to power services, have increased dramatically. So what are the regions that China's overseas ODI focus on? The number one region is still Asia, mainly Hong Kong and Singapore. And then second is Latin America. Third is Africa. In recent years, China's investment in Africa has surpassed what China had in Latin America. We can see in 2008, the annual ODI in Africa first time passed ODI in Latin America. From the right figure, we can see the red line represents the investment in Africa. So because China's investment in Africa caused most attention, then I made this GIS figure. We can see that in Africa, the investment mainly focus on 5 countries. One is South America. The second is Sudan. The investment in Sudan reached the highest point in 2005. And then it's dramatically decreased. The third largest country that received China's ODI is Algeria. And then fourth is Nigeria. All these countries have rich natural resources, mainly oil and different mining products. This is China's investment in Africa. Now people always ask, who are the major players in China's ODI? Who decide where to invest, which sector to invest? I made this figure to show that we can see the top decision maker is the State Council. And underneath State Council, there are different ministries or agencies. In terms of, if we just focus on financing section, we can see the 3 major government agencies are SAFE. SAFE represents the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, which decide what exchange rate you can get. And the second is Ministry of Finance. All the money comes from Ministry of Finance. Third is CBRC. CBRC represents China Banking Regulatory Commission. These 3 agencies, they totally manage China's major policy and commercial banks, which are China Development Bank, China Export-Import Bank, and China Agriculture Bank. These 3 are policy banks. And then there are large commercial banks like Bank of China or others. I will detail later. But I just want to say that these 3 government agencies, they make a decision in terms of financing what project those major banks can finance. Can provide financing and what interest rate. That's what the agencies decide. And in terms of real investors, I mainly talk about larger state-owned enterprises. They are the largest force, the investment operator overseas. So for these state-owned enterprises, the decision makers involved with three government agencies. One is Ministry of Commerce. Ministry of Commerce have to issue the certificate, approval certificate. With that certificate, you can go abroad to invest in a specific country. Second is SASAC, which represent State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission. It really controls the entire country's state-owned enterprises. They decide your performance. They decide if you have capacity to go abroad to invest. And the third most important agency is NDRC. We all know NDRC. NDRC decide if a specific investment fits China's national interest. And so NDRC also has a final saying. So these three agencies decide a specific state-owned enterprises investment. These are the major policy maker. If we come down to how to get a certificate of approval, we can see that for a left bar, it shows if a state-owned enterprises, first they have to go to Ministry of Finance to apply for certificate. During this process, they also have to consult with the economic and commercial council in a specific country. For example, if Sinopec want to buy an oil field in Sudan, then first they go to Ministry of Commerce. Then at the same time, they consult with economic and commercial council in Sudan, which is the Chinese embassy in Sudan, a small section. They consult with them. And Ministry of Finance or Commerce will make a decision, see if it fits China's national interest, see if it also SASAC has to weigh in, see if the company has the capacity to conduct that business in Sudan. And then eventually Ministry of Commerce will decide if it issues certificate approval or not. Then if it's non-state-owned enterprises, which is right-hand side, we can see first they go through the Department of Commerce at the provincial level, and the provincial level Department of Commerce go ahead to consult with, to seek approval from Ministry of Commerce. At that time, they also have to consult with economic and commercial council in a specific country. Eventually, the Ministry of Commerce will decide if they approve certificate or not. That's the decision-making process. Now let's see top three banks financing China's overseas investment. Number one is Export and Import Bank of China. This is a policy bank, and their business scope is mainly mechanical and electrical equipment, new and high-tech products. In 2009, the bank's total overseas lending reaches 174 billion. So the largest project in 2009 it financed is 1,600 million Ecuador Coca-Cola dam, which caused lots of debate among the civil society in Latin America, because they claim that the construction of dam will possibly destroy lots of biodiversity bases in the region. The second largest bank is China Development Bank, which is also a policy bank. And this bank, the investments, they mainly focus on infrastructure and energy. For example, China-Russian oil pipe or China-Iran gas pipe. It's all financed by China Development Bank. The third is Bank of China, which is mainly focused on construction contract and export processing. China doesn't have too many environmental protection policy related to the financing, but China is learning, it's getting up the speed. We can see the first policy that implemented is regulations on implementing financing policy to promote environmental protection. The agency that drafted the regulation is People's Bank of China. I think this maybe Rose will elaborate later. I will just skip this section. And if we look at the largest state-owned owned enterprises based on their investment overseas, the largest will be China National Petrol Corporation, CNPC. Its revenue in 2009 reached 187 billion, and the energy bases include Sudan, Kazakhstan, Venezuela, and Indonesia. That's its energy basis. The second largest is CNOOC. Its energy base is Indonesia, Australia, and Nigeria. The third one is Sino-Hydro. We know that all the dams that built across the world, many is built by Sino-Hydro. The environmental protection policy related to ODI, that's mainly for the investors, not for the banking sectors. This is even less policies related to this. In 2005, they passed this approval rules for overseas investment. It has a little bit content that's related to environmental protection and social responsibility. In 2007, they published the guidelines on sustainable management of overseas forestry for Chinese enterprises. And recently, the Chinese, the MEP, and under the assistance of IFC, is building these guidelines on environmental actions of Chinese overseas enterprises. This will be out very soon, and people are all expecting this policy. So basically, we WI think that we want to work in this sector. We just want to provide a knowledge base for people, no matter people from different sectors, no matter you want to work with China, criticize China or engage with China, you all have to know what the trend is, who are the decision makers. That's what we WI want to do, is to provide analytical and research results for policymakers to make smart decisions. That's what. Okay.
That would be the lucky 8 slides. Okay. Thank There's one thing. I have a World Bank person right here. Just out of curiosity, what is World Bank lending per year? China? Just overall, because I've heard the XM Bank, she said, was 174.2 billion.
It has gone up to 50 billion recently, but that's because of a large transfer related to the economic crisis through development policy lending. Our typical
I should give her a mic, actually. Wait. I need a mic because we're webcasting, so it just... No, so what I ask... I mean, you understand why I'm asking this, right? I want scale.
Our typical lending is between 20 and 30 billion, but in the last year, I think it was close to 50, and that was related to the economic downturn and trying to, inject capital into countries that really needed to meet their...
So China XM is doing 3 times as much as the World Bank. Okay? I just wanted, because I want us to get our brains around this. There's a lot of money out there. All right. And in that little interlude, we changed the PowerPoint slides and gave a good context for you. Yes?
Yes.
All right. And just the mics are working for us again. Thumbs up to the AV team. And let's move on.
Do I press anything? No, you can hear me. Good morning. I would like to thank Jennifer Turner for organizing this panel. And I'm very happy to be here today. I've been living in Cambodia. I'm Suwana Gauntlet. I've been living in Cambodia and working there for the last 10 years. And Xiao Mei, your presentation was very useful to us because you've answered many questions that we have about who are the decision makers and who are the investors for the China footprint that we have in Cambodia. And I'm going to proceed with explaining how we're trying to handle the Chinese investors and helping minimize their environmental footprint. First of all, the slide that you see there is a pathetic destruction of rainforest by Union Development, who is a Chinese investor from a Chinese enterprise, which I think is, we have to talk afterwards, I'm not exactly sure of where they come from, but they have actually bought 36,000 hectares of land along the coast. They've bought most of the coast in Kokong province in Cambodia, and they forcibly evicted 700 families. What you see here are the housing relocation sites which have been bulldozed, and it has nothing to do with hydropower, but it has to do with their environmental footprint. What does Wildlife Alliance do? We implement a direct approach to protecting rainforest, watersheds, and wildlife. As Jennifer mentioned before, we're not just about wildlife. We're mostly about sustainable development and working with investors on how to reduce and minimize deforestation. We work with government to strengthen law enforcement and good governance and build political will at all levels of government, which surprisingly can be successful because the government is very committed. And we work with communities to develop viable alternatives to destructive livelihoods, such as slash and burn cultivation, logging, and wildlife illegal trade. One of the tools that we've been focusing on is the development of economic incentives to keep the forest standing, both for the government and for the communities. So one of them is payment for environmental services, or what we call payment for watershed protection, as well as revenues for the community from ecotourism and red carbon sales revolving funds. Now let's start looking at the hydropower situation in Cambodia. Here you have Cambodia, and for those of you who are not familiar with Cambodia, is there anybody here not familiar with Cambodia? Okay, so you know where the... Okay, so let me just situate Cambodia.
I have to have a mic, sorry. Oh, sorry. Unless you can yell really loud. Just make sure it's on, okay.
Thank you. Cambodia is half the size of California. And this is the Vietnamese border on the south and the east. On the west is the Thai border. And on the northern border is Laos. And immediately after that is China. You can see the amazing rainfall that Cambodia has. Cambodia is completely flat in the center. That is where you have the famous Mekong River Basin and Tonle Sap, which is the largest fisheries in Southeast Asia. The highest rainfalls, therefore that's where the hydropower dams are going to be, are in the northeast and mostly in the southwest where we work, which is the Cardamom Mountains, with a staggering 3,000 to 5,000 millimeters per year. So
I'll just keep that. Yep.
Cambodia has 25 hydropower projects with 42 dams. And the production of a total estimated 7,200 megawatts. It is just under construction. I think one dam is ready to function, but that's about it. In the area that we are working in, which is the Cardamom Mountains, there are 16 hydropower dams 16 hydropower projects with 18 dams and an estimated 1,731 megawatts. 53% of the country's estimated hydropower potential is along the Mekong mainstream. About 26% is along the Mekong tributaries in the northeast in Ratnakiri and Mondulkiri, and about 20% along non-Mekong tributaries in the Cardamoms. I've been asked to talk about payment for environmental services and other economic incentives that we are helping put in place to minimize China's footprint in the hydropower sector. What we're doing is we're preparing proactively while the dams are being built. We're preparing an economic system whereby hydropower dams will be obligated to pay a certain amount per kilowatt to a body, hopefully a provincial body, who will then disburse this money to park rangers and people living in the area to protect the watershed. This also ends up being an economic incentive for the hydropower operators themselves because it protects the volume of water coming into their dams. Later on I will show you a map of what the minimum watershed is for each of these hydropower dams. Unfortunately for the Cambodian government is very weak when it comes to Chinese investors. China, as Xiaomei has demonstrated, has enormous power in terms of investments. Cambodia is a very small country, and they just came out of war, so they really bow down to the Chinese investors, and their contracts are very weak, which means that in terms of payment for environmental services, they have vaguely promised in their contracts to put aside every year some money in an environmental fund for paying the fishermen downstream that are losing their revenue. About 60% of fish species will be destroyed from these hydropower projects, and some vague intervention to protect what is their minimum watershed. But this is not really a payment for environmental services. So we have been working now for 2 years with the Ministry of Environment in an effort to get the government itself to be strong enough and willing enough to stand their ground in front of these Chinese investors. And we're almost at that stage where the government will be willing to say to the Chinese operators, you will pay something per kilowatt hour. So it's still politically incorrect. We're working in the corridors of power, and we're working on developing a regional pilot in Siem Reap, which is the province where Tonle Sap Lake is, and it's centered around tourism. So it's very non-threatening. It's a much smaller project, but it's very vital to the country because it has to do with water supply to the city of Siem Reap, which is the largest tourism center of the country and is also home to the famous Angkor Wat temples. These temples will cave in if the aquifer is completely depleted, and it's tragic to think of that happening. But that gives a great incentive to the government to work on payment for environmental services for the protection of the watershed that provides water to Siem Reap town. So that's what we're doing right now. It's going to take, maybe 2 or 3 years to get that completed and successful, and that will be the springboard for a national policy on PES. By then, the hydropower construction will be finished, and we will be very close to production time with the Chinese company. So there's a lot of preparation work. Let's see. Yeah, now here you can see very clearly in the southwest the number of dams, which is where we work, circled with the yellow line, and the other hydropower dams, mostly in Ratnakiri in the northeast, represented by the black little triangles, whereas in the cardamoms it's the red triangles. Hydropower has quite a lot of impacts, and some of them we don't usually think of. Of course, there's deforestation of the reservoir. You have to clear the reservoir to contain the water for the dams. But another impact that's not very often thought of is what happens during the construction period. Construction periods are quite long. They're about 5 years for each construction site, and you have anywhere from 3,000 to 4,500 workers on site. In Myanmar, Chinese hydropower projects are being built with, as you might know, Chinese prisoners. And in Africa, wherever Chinese prisoners were brought, they were left. They are never taken back. The country gets rid of them by dumping them in the host country. We've asked that question. We've been promised that these will not be Chinese prisoners, because if it is, this is an enormous additional footprint on the area, because they don't speak the language, they don't have jobs, they will have to live in the wild, they will deforest further with chamkas and hunting and fishing. But nevertheless, these workers have an impact. They will have their families with them if they are local. They are not provided food. They're only provided a roof and toilets, although I doubt they will be provided any sanitation at all. Since they will not be provided food, there will be a trend of moving into the forest and living off the forest during that time. And that's what we're here for. If we were not there, there would be a much larger footprint and much more deforestation. So we're working with the companies to contain that. But human waste, if you count about an average of 4,500 workers, the human waste is about 150 tons of human waste per month. And that will be going into the rivers, the very rivers that are the supply of water to the dams. Very unfortunately for this, in this situation, downstream are emerging ecotourism sites, because we've been able, with the government, to protect the Cardamom Mountains as a tourism destination since 2002, and it's been very successful. If you get a huge pollution of the waterways, and if the reservoirs, in addition, are not properly cleared, and there is vegetation left in the reservoirs, that will create a lot of methane and a terrible stench going down the rivers where the tourists are conducting leisure activities, and this methane is anticipated to last for a minimum of 1 year. Another downside of that is we are conducting, there are several organizations actually conducting in the area RED projects for sale of carbon offsets, and if you have methane emissions next to your carbon offsets, then your buyers will not buy. Let me see, what else can I tell you? Chinese aid funding, or actually it's Chinese investment funding, is about $1 billion for 2 dams. And these are BOT, build, operate, and transfer, in a period about 15, 20 years, which actually demotivates the operators for doing the right thing. They know that they have to do a quick and dirty job. They're just going to recoup their investment with maybe a 20% return on investment, and then they're out of the picture. So they've been very difficult to deal with one exception, which is the Tatai Hydropower Dam. And we've been working actually with the Tatai Hydropower Company on minimizing their construction sites. Initially, they were advertising that they were going to clear an area of 492,000 hectares for the worker barracks, the powerhouses, etc. And we've been able to work with them to reduce it to 135 hectares, because nobody had really paid attention to what was the size of a barrack, what was the size of the powerhouse, what was the size of the management building. So that was very successful. Another area is the disposal area. They have an 11.5 kilometer tunnel that they're blasting with dynamite. Huge. I think it's 34,000 kilos of dynamite, or I think it's 34,000 kilos of dynamite and explosives that they're using, which is also a dangerous waste. Well, anyway, this rock that they're blasting that's coming out of these tunnels, they have to put it somewhere. And typically what they'll do is they'll just put it anywhere, and it looks like a moon landscape, because there's no planning, no coordination, and especially no land use organization. So what we've succeeded in doing is for them to commit to putting the spoils on top of the tunnel in an orderly fashion, so there can be some kind of rehabilitation of the site afterwards. And they've been quite cooperative on that, I have to say. An interesting point, which is not always Chinese footprint, but is related to dams, is what we're working on in Tonle Sap Lake, and that is dams for diversion of water for agriculture. This is a small dam. Thank you. This is a small dam compared to a hydropower dam, but you can see that it spans from this point to this point, which is, I would say it's about 50 meters long, or maybe 100 meters long. This is Siem Reap River that feeds the town of Siem Reap in water, and traditionally has been 1 cubic meter per second of water flow during the dry season, and is now a mere 0.05 cubic meters during the dry season. If you had only one of these, it might not be that serious, but you have 53 of these over a distance of 16 kilometers. It's in every single community you have a dam. One wonders how water can still reach the city. You see the rivers proceeding normally until this dam, and there is no visible water coming out. But you go down 1 kilometer, and here is, all of a sudden, the water reappears. It's a very sick riparian watershed. So we're working on it with the government and with the hotels to reestablish. It's going to be about a 7 to 10 year project to reestablish the health of the watershed. some of the economic land concessions from China are similarly diverting water from the main rivers going to the Tonle Sap Lake so as to monopolize the water for their enormous plantations.
It's probably not just Chinese agricultural concessions there,
It's
too, right?
also Cambodian.
Cambodian and
Yes.
Korean and...
It's mostly Cambodian, I'd say Cambodian, Chinese, and some Vietnamese. Not a lot of
But not
Koreans.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks. Here, I can take it. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
I think that's about it. This is the similar to the first slide that was on the title slide. It's the forcible relocation of 700 families by Union Development. No rules apply. If Wildlife Alliance wasn't there, this kind of huge-scale logging, which is illegal, would be going on around all the concessions. This logging operation is located outside the economic land concessions, outside the social land concessions for forcible evictions, and they're using it for export. We're not sure for where, but it's a huge enterprise, and we're cracking down on them. Land use. It's very important when you look at somebody's footprint or a country's footprint to look at the overall picture of what is going on and how much of the natural ecosystem has already been converted to other uses. This is the Cardamom Mountains. For those of you who have been to Cambodia, Phnom Penh is here. You take road number 4 down to the beaches of Sihanoukville, which are here. And this is Kokong Province, the southern Cardamoms. Union Development that I mentioned before with the forcible evictions is located all along this coast in yellow, and it's 36,000 hectares. The families have been relocated to this area in the mountain. The hydropower dams minimum watershed are these lighter green surfaces with yellow dots are all the headwaters of the tributaries and rivers going to the dams. These this kind of lined area is Wildlife Alliance Forestry Administration RED project for sale of carbon. Mining is another area. This is a projected titanium mine in the middle of our Elephant Corridor and ecotourism area, which has a 20% Chinese investment projected. All of these yellow land use are economic land concessions for crops. Some of them are Chinese. For example, Great Field Company has this kind of V-shaped sugarcane and rubber plantation. They were convinced that they could wield their power and come into the southern Cardamom area, which, by the way, is circled by this purple line. And they were planning on getting these 2 concessions for sugarcane by changing their name to Tinbo and Wuhoa. And very fortunately for us, having lobbied all the ministries, especially the ministry who has jurisdiction, we were able to have their permits not accepted. So these 2 have not been accepted. Generally, in our area, we have been able to prevent and stop about 500,000 hectares of economic land concessions, which is enormous. It corresponds to about the entire middle section of the southern Cardamoms. And this has been achieved since 2004. So the Cambodian government is committed and can work with NGOs to improve their environmental footprint, but it is extremely difficult, and one has to know how to work the system. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to have like some happiness, you know. Because there's bad, but that's why it's very exciting. But you guys, work very quietly for many years there.
Very quietly.
Okay, all right. Now we're moving on. So she brought up trees a couple times here, and now we're gonna delve even deeper. Okay, here you go.
Does this work?
That does, yeah.
Okay. So thanks for coming today, everybody.
Can you bring it up so you can just kind of bend it? So it's those people in webland, they just can't hear that well unless we amplify ourselves. Okay.
Okay, so my name is Keith Barney, and I'll be talking about forest land concessions and what I'll call global production networks and resource geopolitics, examining the connections between China and Mekong, Southeast Asia. And this builds upon my dissertation research mostly in Laos, as well as various research work with some different Washington-based policy groups. Okay, so just a quick outline of what I'll be talking about. I'll introduce just some basic conceptual approaches to transboundary resource sector development in the Mekong region in the context of a global land grab. And second, I'll explain some basic parameters of China's emerging territorial footprint in rural and upland Laos and Cambodia. Thirdly, I'll explain the role of domestic and regional investors, including Thailand, Vietnam, Japan, and others, in a Lao and Cambodian land concession politics. Fourthly, just a quick overview of a couple of short case studies of China-based and what I'll call China-linked transnational companies in Mekong agribusiness. And lastly, I'll finish up with some thoughts on development dilemmas in regulating the forest land sector in a globalizing Mekong region. Okay, so just to start off with, in terms of how I was approaching this talk, I was thinking less in terms of, thinking about China's role in the Mekong region and I'm sort of understanding states as these sort of spatial containers with coherent and singular sets of interests. And my idea was to talk a little bit more about how cross-border flows of commodities, investments, information, and people are linking China and Southeast Asia. And this basically builds upon some of my research in economic geography around global commodity chains and global production networks, which trace the flows of commodities from production to transport, manufacturing, and consumption, and analyzes the role of different institutional actors in regulating these processes, as well as looking at how wealth is generated and wealth is captured along these chains. One of the key ways in which I'll be explaining this is through the idea of forest land concessions, which are basically just long-term leases of land, usually by governments to private companies, in exchange for rents or royalties to develop agribusiness. And the concept of resource rents is a crucial aspect here. And resource rents are basically supernormal profits enjoyed by companies. And often I'll suggest that the way in which resource rents are being captured is through underpriced access to land in Southeast Asia. And this is all in the context of the uplands of Laos and Cambodia. And Yale professor James Scott has called this, framed this as the last great enclosure movement in Southeast Asia. Okay, so just basically I'll start off with a little bit of mention about natural timbers and forestry, and it's important to keep some of these different commodity linkages separate. So this is natural forest logging, and it's been widely noted that China has played an increasing role regionally and globally in the last 15 or 20 years. And this is just data from Forest Trends, looking at based on Chinese customs data, looking at total wood imports from 1997, 40 million cubic meters, and increasing up to 2008, more than quadrupling to 175 million cubic meters per year imported into China. And just to give sort of an indication of the scale of what 75 million cubic meters might represent, the total annual Canadian timber harvest is about 250 million cubic meters per year. So this is a sizable chunk of, a country like Canada's forest production being directed towards China. Okay, but in terms of understanding the impacts in Laos and Cambodia, it's actually they're neighboring countries which are playing a much more dominant role in their forest product exports. Vietnam and Thailand are by far the largest importers of natural forest timbers from both Laos and Cambodia. For Laos, the annual exports have been estimated at about 800,000 cubic meters per year, and almost all of this is split between Thailand and Vietnam. For Cambodia, the figures are estimated around 300,000 cubic meters per year, dropped quite a bit from the boom years of the 1990s, and almost all of this seems to be heading towards Vietnam. So China is playing a role, but not a strong role in terms of how natural forest logging is proceeding in Laos and Cambodia. And it's also the case that the sort of the last frontiers of these natural forests are quickly being met in both countries. And you can expect that these figures will probably be dropping off in the coming years. But the replacement for natural forest logging is, of course, plantations and agribusiness investment, and this is where a lot of the action is happening these days. So Laos shows complex combinations of smallholder development, contract farming, particularly the role of Chinese networks in contract farming in northern Laos, as well as large-scale land concessions. And these seem to be concentrated more in the south of the country and are forwarded by Thai, Vietnamese, Indian, Japanese, and other countries. Cambodia seems to be mostly large-scale land concessions. I don't really read too much about agribusiness networks and contract farming in that country. The tree crops are rubber, pulpwood, oil palm in particular, as well as agri-food concessions, maize, sugarcane, cassava, and there's been some mention of rice deals as well. I haven't seen too much explained in more detail on that, though. Okay, so just a quick overview of the situation with forest land concessions in Cambodia. This is data from the Cambodian government. They have a website which has a brief logbook on the situation with concessions. It's sort of unclear how accurate that might be, though. But the estimates are total area of land concessions around 1 million hectares, about 5 to 6% of the country. And looking through the data, you can sort of piece through the China-linked concessions that are happening. And I'll just talk about the forest plantation ones, rubber, pulpwood, teak, and pine. 14 China-linked concessions covering about 160,000 hectares, but far less has usually actually been planted. So it's, the suggestion is that a lot of these concessions are actually forms of real estate speculation or ways to access natural forest timbers. So in this area, China is the number 2 investor in Cambodia after domestic investors. And this just sort of paints a picture of when you add up what all this looks like on the map anyway. The legend here is unimportant. It just adds up all of the different types of concessions that are going on in Cambodia, including Ministry of Forestry protected areas, mining concessions, plantation concessions, hydropower sites. And you can see the purple dots are the population centers, which go from the southeast of the country up around the Tonle Sap Lake. So you can really see the northeast and the southwest are where there seems to be sort of available land, and it looks like almost all of this has been carved up on the map anyway and allocated to external investors. The situation with concessions in Laos is pretty unclear, actually. There's a nationwide survey underway to gauge the extent of all the different concessions that have been handed out by various levels of the Lao government. The German group GTZ estimates between 2 to 3 million hectares granted in the last 10 years or so, about 13% of the total area of the country. Rubber has been reported in the Vientiane Times newspaper at reaching 400,000 hectares by this year, maybe about 150,000 hectares of plantation timber concessions. But it's hard to say because there's not been detailed survey work done in all the provinces so far. The national regulator has published the survey from just Vientiane province, one province in Laos, and they discovered 237 agribusiness concessions. Of these, 30 were from China or involved Lao-Chinese joint ventures. So China was the number 2 investor for Vientiane province. So China is playing a pretty significant role as well. So just some overview points of the role of China in Mekong Southeast Asia agribusiness. There's literally dozens of small to medium-scale China-based or China-linked projects, as well as some large-scale concessions. In northern Laos, it often takes the form of contract farming arrangements between investors and local people, where the local people supply the land and the labor, and the investors supply the capital and the technology and the markets. Often, however, this sort of degenerates into a situation where local people provide the labor and the company gets the land and the capital and the extension of the markets, and sometimes it's just the company takes over, basically. So the Chinese market in general, though, is also important for all sorts of agribusiness production in Laos. So it's not just the role of Chinese investors; it's also the role of China as a market. But domestic and regional investors are also playing a key role, and I'll talk about that a little bit next. So in terms of thinking about global production networks and linkages to China, I'll talk a little bit about what I study in more detail, and that's involving the pulp and paper sector. And the idea of a global production network can be applied pretty well to the pulp and paper sector, because these are very large billion-dollar investments in pulp mills, which are going in around, especially located in China, and their supply networks reach globally, extending to all sorts of different countries. So I'll just introduce a few of the key ones that are happening in Laos right now. And these don't always involve Chinese companies. They can be external Western companies or Japanese companies or regional companies who are expanding their production facilities within China and then developing plantation sources in Southeast Asia. So the first one is OG Paper has a large greenfield capacity expansion project near Shanghai. And they're developing 75,000 hectares of supply plantations in central and southern Laos. The second one is actually a Chinese company, although, again, it's Shandong Sun Paper, but it's partnered for their expansion with U.S.-based International Paper. So that shows some of the transnational connections and how this is moving forward. They're proposing 100,000 hectares of plantations in central Laos. Stora Enso from Finland, one of the largest paper companies in the world, has a large pulp manufacturing plant proposed in Guangxi province in southern China. And to feed this, to help supply this, they're proposing 35,000 hectares in central and southern Laos. And the last one, Asia Pulp and Paper, which is a bit of a notorious pulp company in Indonesia, they have a huge project on Hainan Island, and they're proposing to supply this in part through plantations based in Laos. And this is just to give you the scale of the investments that are happening. This is their Asia Pulp and Paper's pulp facility on Hainan Island, the largest single pulp line in the world. And they're making 1 million tons of pulp a year, which requires 6.5 million cubic meters of wood per year. So 6.5 million for annually. So, just the sheer the logistics of arranging this are incredibly complex and has the potential to place a lot of pressure on forest land resources and local communities in neighboring areas. And you can see how Laos sort of fits into this picture if you take a look and step back and look at the map. Yeah. Formerly quite peripheral, remote areas in southern Laos here. I don't have a. Oh, you have a point. You can just sort of see you can just see the panhandle there of Laos coming down. These are quite difficult to reach places usually. In the last few years with ADB infrastructure and highway upgrades, now all of a sudden they're only 100 kilometers away from an export port based in Vietnam. And then you can see Hainan Island right there. So there's a clear geographical logic emerging in terms of how Laos is being situated as a regional forestry plantation supplier. And Laos offers low-cost access to so-called degraded forest land in a national context of low or quite flexible environmental regulations. Okay. So some of that title just disappeared a little bit. So I'll just explain a couple of short case studies to give you a bit of a local flavor of how these projects are playing out on the ground. And this first one involves the OG Lao Plantation Forestry Project in central Laos, a 50,000 hectare acacia and eucalyptus pulpwood project. And the question of how they get access to land is interesting, and how they, this is related to the generation and capture of resource rents in these commodity chains. So how they access their land so far is through a concession zoning process regulated through the Lao Forest Land Allocation Program, which operated from about mid-90s to 2003. And you can sort of see how, where's the
red things?
The red one? They sort of divide the village spaces into different forest land categories, internal zoning, and then the sort of the pinkish, 3 pink areas here are the areas that have been allocated to the company from within that overall village spaces. So the company's taking about a third of village land, 600 hectares out of 1,800 hectares has been zoned for plantation development for the company. And you can just sort of see how this is sort of the landscape that is emerging as the areas get cleared. Some of the local concerns with how it's moving forward. The villagers are enjoying quite limited direct benefits. They get a payment of which amounts to $1 per hectare per year for their land from the company. there's no guaranteed access to labor, although there are labor opportunities, but not for everybody. The government of Laos provided the land to the investor without charge in exchange for a 15% joint venture share in the company. So it's a, whether that's a good strategy or not, I guess it depends on how much profit the company makes and things like that. And this is often how it sort of works, though, where in Laos the government allocates resources in exchange for capital investment. Is turning resources into capital is their strategy. There are conflicts of interest in the zoning process, of course. The entire land zoning framework was financially supported by the company, which has a direct interest in gaining access to land, so that's a fairly direct conflict of interest. There's also various ambiguities in how the zoning should play out. The definition of degraded forest land, does it include villager Swidden land, which is actually agricultural production land? And the key issue is that villagers are basically losing long-term access to agricultural production land, and whether the effects of this will be compensated for by increased labor opportunities, increased agricultural intensification. That's all the question that will decide how it all happens. The second very short case study. Are we doing okay?
You're doing okay.
This is the Stora Enso pulpwood project in southern Laos, Nong and Taoi districts. And this is the Finnish company, which has the expansion plant in southern China. So they're proposing a 35,000 hectare eucalyptus acacia pulpwood project. And this area of Laos is located along the former Ho Chi Minh Trail zone. So there's lots of remnants and legacies of the Vietnam War in the area. And you can see here there's the houses and rice huts built, supported by the shells from the B-52 bombing strikes in Laos. And that hole in the ground there is what one of those can do. And you can sort of see like that bombing crater is kind of in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And that's sort of how the bombing sort of happened in Laos. It was basically kind of indiscriminate 40,000 foot from planes bombing from that height. And this is sort of just shows the intensification of the U.S. bombing in Laos in that area, and the areas that the plantation is happening are in Zaphon district and Nong district, and the next province down south here. So you can see it's fairly intensive coverage of bombings, and there's lots of unexploded ordnance in that area as well. And that's part of how the project is being moving forward. They're clearing out all of the unexploded ordnance from the area. This is one of their innovations of the project, and freeing up land for agricultural development. And they're also developing an interesting way of trying to address concerns around local food security, where they've adjusted the spacing of their plantations. So usually in a typical pulpwood plantation, the trees are spaced in a uniform manner in 2 meter by 3 meter or 3 meter by 3 meter spacings. And this company is doing their spacings in a 1 meter by 9 meter fashion, which opens up corridors where agricultural crops can be intercropped between the pulpwood. And apparently the trees grow well, and they have had some success with their intercropping arrangements so far, planting rice and other commercial cash crops in between the trees. Whether that's sustainable on a longer-term basis or not is one of the key questions of the project. So local issues with this project. The company is using the new participatory land use planning process in Laos, which has recently been developed to replace the problems of the former land zoning process. But nevertheless, they're still gaining access to a fairly significant chunk of village land. So you wonder, really, what's so participatory about it?
Everybody is part of it.
It's a question. And there are potential problems with the land zoning procedures once the project starts to accelerate. So far, the trial sites have been just a few hundred hectares. What happens when they start planting 5,000 hectares per year? Will their standards hold up? The company is following the proper regulatory process, including registration of the concession agreement with the government of Laos. I think they're the only company in Laos actually to have done this. They're following the environmental and social impact assessment process, etc. But again, questions are there concerning the longer-term viability of planting agricultural crops and rice in between intensively managed pulpwood plantations.
Just quick, can you remind me which company was this?
This is the Stora Enso project.
Okay.
The Finnish company.
Finnish company. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And the last concern is that villagers are basically being required, peasant villagers are basically being required to embark upon a very rapid shift into wage labor and commercially based livelihoods, and whether that will be whether they'll be able to really engage with this is that's a significant question. Okay, so just a couple of conclusions maybe on development dilemmas around forest land sector in the Mekong region. There's a rapid expansion of tropical plantation production. China is emerging as a global import complex and a timber manufacturing platform for all sorts of products. China is linked in complex ways to the ongoing plantation concession boom in Laos and Cambodia. And remember that these issues are not restricted around land ownership and village livelihoods. They're not somehow particular to Laos and Cambodia. Within China, there are major problems with this as well. And notably, the Washington-based Rights and Resources Initiative has just published a study on Stora Enso's, the Finnish company's plantation project in China. And it emerges that there were some quite serious problems around coercion and evictions of villagers as the company was using middlemen to gain access to land within China. So, and in fact, I read a paper the other day which estimated that between 40 to 70 million households within China have lost their land in the last 20 years. So
for these plantations?
No, in general, like in terms of households losing access to land. So this sort of enclosure within China dwarfs, in terms of the scale, it dwarfs what's happening in neighboring countries. So these are issues which are common to rural people both within China and in Southeast Asia. So there's rapid transformation in property rights in rural areas, and often villagers are getting squeezed in terms of their informal or customary access to land and other resources. And the outcomes of all this depend on the trajectory of what is a very rapid agrarian transition. And the goal, I think, should be to increase the safeguards that are protecting rural people in this situation. In this effort, there's global and national civil society activities towards protecting land rights. It's also not just a clear, there's fuzziness in these questions. For example, what is the legitimate role of the Lao and Cambodian state governments in adjudicating the extent of villager land claims? Should we recognize the fullest extent of what every village claims as their customary land, or does the state have a role in adjudicating these questions? These are where the tough issues start to come in. Can there be trade-offs? Can villagers trade land for labor opportunities and land for opportunities for commercial investments? Can this sometimes be beneficial for communities? Geopolitical issues could be at work, I guess, but it's also just as much in Laos and Cambodia, it's just as much a question of how the central governments are exerting their own control inside their own national peripheries. And just a final thought, I guess, on what it comes down to, I think, is trying to promote best practices and the issue of free, prior, and informed consent for rural communities. They should have a choice in this matter, and protection should be built in terms of how communal and individual land rights are being recognized. And there's all sorts of different ways in which policy reforms are trying to promote this, which are probably too complex to go into for this presentation. Okay, so the end result is a rapidly changing Mekong countryside. And just to maybe I'll just close with this little photo from this is one of my research villages in southern Laos, and this is Mr. Boon Home is his name, the guy without a shirt on, and he's helping the tractor driver who's clearing his village land. The track came off of their bulldozer, and he's giving the driver a hand trying to fix the tractor. So I was looking at this picture and thinking, how do you understand villager responses to agribusiness investment in this case, right? Like clearly here's a local villager who's actually helping the tractor driver who's clearing his village land. So I was thinking, well, see, it's pretty complex. I went back to the village a year later, and it turns out that Mr. Boonholm and some of his friends had been stealing gasoline from the tractor, and the company had caught them. So, there was this sort of little fiasco within the village around how him and his buddies had been caught stealing gasoline from the tractor driver. So it just goes to show you that it's complex on the ground, and you have to spend some time and understand the local situation to get a real sense of what's sort of happening.
Wow. Okay, how many of you want to read his dissertation when it comes out? Right? This is great. Wow. That is very... And so now we're going to move back up again a little bit, but this all kind of fits together, doesn't it? Yeah? We're all getting... It's always the kind of thing, you bring four complete strangers together, and it's kind of working. So Rose is going to close us out, again, giving us a little bit, back a little bit to the macro level on some of the ecological footprint issues. Maybe we'll... Okay, and I've got... Keep noting your questions down, and we will interrogate the speakers shortly. Rose, it's you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for inviting me to speak this morning, and good morning, everyone. Well, three speakers really gave us an excellent presentation on specific on-the-ground project, and now I would like to bring all of us back to a broader macro picture of this issue, China's global ecological footprint. Before touch China, I would like to give you a little bit report on some fundings. WWF just issued a Living Planet report this month, and the funding of the global ecological footprint is a daunting question on how humanity is using up the natural capital of the Earth, of our Mother Earth. So this charter, everyone is talking about global footprint of China, and so on and so forth. Since nobody among them mentioned this concept before, so I would like to give you a little introduction about the concept. Ecological footprint is a way to measuring, humanity's using of natural capital of planet, or it's a way to measure humans' demand on Mother Earth. That's the way. And a major component of the ecological footprint include, carbon emission. And you can see from this graph that actually recently the carbon emission is increasing dramatically, and that counts more and more portion of the total ecological footprint. And then you have grassland, forest land, fishery, agricultural land, and also built-up land, human use. So you can see from this graph, since middle 1970, human beings has been using more resources that the Earth can regenerate each year. That's the general picture of where we are today. And carbon is the major contributor of increase in ecological footprint. And what does that mean for us? So according to our Living Planet report, that means in 2007, human being has been using 1.5 planet each year. Or put it in another way, the Earth or the planet need a year and a half to regenerate all the resources human beings are using, and then also to absorb all the waste we're putting on the Earth or into the air. That's a very, very unpleasant picture. Nobody wants to see this. So a global strike for reducing the ecological footprint is a very daunting task for every single human being on Earth, I think. And then now let's go back to China. And China has been and will be one of the major players on this strike for reducing the ecological footprint of human beings. Simply because China has such a huge population base and also rapid economic development, and also it's a exported-oriented economy structure. So now the whole world is talking about, the challenge China's economic growth is imposing on Earth, on the planet. China has been grow its economy very rapidly in the past 30 years, and it's predicted that in a decade, China will re-emerge as the single largest economy again in the earth. All of us know that in the past 2,500 years, except recent 300 years, China was the largest single economy in the world, and now it's re-emerging as its historic record again. Therefore, China is consuming a lot of energy, mineral resources, and also biomass products. This really is imposing an enormous pressure on environment in China as well as many other countries. And China will play a very important role on reducing the global ecological footprint. But we have to speak with fact and number. When all of us talking about China's global ecological footprint, we have to look at what average Chinese is consuming every day. So those data came from our Living Planet report in 2008, which indicate the number in 2005. So in 2005, according to our research, average Chinese is only consuming 1/6 of average American consumed. And from the graph in the right-hand side, sorry, I have to go back. Here, you can see also China since 1970s, China is using up more resources than its land and water can provide its population. So in other words, China started ecological deficit since 1970. And then that deficit grew dramatically in the recent 30 years, of course. In 2007, China is used twice as much resources and energy its land and water can produce. So it's a big, big problem. So everyone know in late 1990s and early 2000s, central government, actually it was President Jiang Zemin promote this idea of go global strategy. All of us know that China started go global to access the resources. That's the thing many people know. That's the only way for China to close or to cover the ecological deficit. But at the same time, many people doesn't know that the reasoning behind go global strategy is also to access global market and also to absorb the excess production capacity China has, because China has grown its production capacity as a major manufacturer center for the whole world. And at the same time, China want to move up to the global value chain. Now China is in the very low end of the global value chain of production, and that's not good for China. So those are all the reasons for China to go global. This is the most updated number we got from our Living Planet report for China. As the workshop of the world, China is importing a lot of natural resources and energy. And those numbers, those yellow, is that okay?
I think it's okay.
Okay. Those yellow arrows are the amount of biomass products China import from different countries, from different regions. And then blue arrow is the one China export the biomass products to different countries. So you can see actually China is importing a lot of biomass products from US, but at the same time, if you look at the this corner, China is also exporting a lot of biomass products again to the US. If we add up all the manufacturer consuming goods China exported to the world, China is a net exporter of biocapacity, and that's not where China should be and want to be, because given its huge population and degraded environment and depleted natural resources, China doesn't want to be a net exporter of biocapacity, of course. So realizing those dilemma and also the challenges, Chinese government, the good news is that Chinese government realized the dilemma, but at the same time, the urgency and the need to change the way China develop its economy. So we really believe that highest level of political will is there. China is very committed to reduce its ecological footprint, including lower its carbon emission, as all of us know. And we really believe that it's possible for China to leapfrogging and not to repeat the same development path a lot of Western development countries went through in the past, to be innovator of, more efficient resources and energy use, and to develop, to explore a new, more sustainable development path. We hope, and we have to help China. We have to work with China to achieve their sustainable development objective. Otherwise, the stake is too high to not doing anything, not to work with China for achieving that leapfrogging. Now, after giving all the background, I would like to share two global initiatives WWF launched 2 years ago to respond to those challenges and also opportunities. WWF Global Network initiated first initiative called China for a Global Shift. And the overall goal is really to help China leapfrogging into a major player in sustainable development. And we are working on 4 major aspects. First of all, we have to influence the policy. We have to work with all those decision makers to change the domestic and overseas economic policies. And we also, as Xiaomei pointed out, financial industry is such a key lever and such a key actor. We have to work with them to improve their environment performance of their investment policy and practices. And at the same time, as Keith very well demonstrated, that trade of major commodities play a major role also. So we're working with MOFCOM, or Ministry of Commerce, and also NDRC and others to make China be more responsible when it trades all those major commodities. And finally, we want to work with China on those green technologies. Those are the 4 major components of our initiative. When you think about those big daunting challenge, how we asked ourselves, how can we be more effective? How can we help China achieve those challenges, overcome those challenges? We believe we have to take a very strategic and programmatic approach and really offer a good solution and real solution which fit into Chinese context. So we've already worked with, as I said, policymakers to catalyze more political awareness, to cultivate and really capacity, to build the capacity among government partners to achieve their sustainability objectives. At the same time, we have to focus on a few key sectors. We cannot work with everyone. It's too much. So we focus on trade policies and major companies, and also MOFCOM, NDRC, those major policy decision makers. And at the same time, we have to recruit or cultivate some champions in China and also in other regions where China sources a lot of natural resources. And at the same time, finally, we have to achieve those leapfrogging. Since Xiaomei already talked a lot in details about how Chinese financial sector play significant role on sustainability, so I will only quickly mention that we have signed MOU with several policy banks and also a bank. It's a bank regulatory committee, Export and Import Bank, and also ICBC, the biggest bank in the world today. We have signed the MOU to share best practices with them. We organized 2 study tours for those officials from those banks, one to Europe and another to Africa, to look at the impact of their investment can make and how can they learn the best practices from other countries. We are also organizing some feasibility study on how do you benchmark China's environment performance of the investment policy and see what's the gap, and then how to close the gap. We're doing that feasibility study. At the same time, we believe that at the end of the day, the green lending of Chinese banks have to be implemented by their branches or their a lot of their branches in different countries. So we want to help provide information about biodiversity. We want those regions and countries where China invested to feedback on the impact possible. And then international organizations like us can provide a lot of methodologies and tools to help Chinese bank to do a better job. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about commodity and trade. We identified 15 key commodities which has the biggest impact on Earth or on the natural environment of the planet. And those production of those 15 key commodities will determine the future of the natural forest or those natural areas we still have. And you can see today it's said 37% of total Earth's land have been cleared for production of those commodities, which count about 55% of the habitable land. So it's a lot. If you can make production of those commodities more sustainable, we will have a good future. The planet will have a good future. So we choose these 15 commodities to work on. And the production of those commodities overlap, of course, with a lot of priority habitats for wildlife, and many regions I named here are the conservation priorities for many governments and also for many international conservation organizations. Each region have different challenge from production of those commodities. For example, for Amazon, major threats for deforestation actually came from soybeans and beef production. And it's said that about 50% of the soya production in Brazil export to China. But one fact I would like to figure out is 70% of that exportation was not handled by Chinese companies. It was handled by multinational companies like Cargill and Bunge and so on and so forth. So this is really not an issue of China or Chinese investment. It's a global issue, therefore need a global solution. Producers, processors, manufacturers, traders, and final consuming countries have to work all together to solve the problem. So this map just to show a few examples of China's major sourcing countries for key commodities. And again, for Africa, you can see Congo Basin is a major place for China to get minerals and timbers. And palm oil, Southeast Asia countries, is a major exporter of those, and also live reef fish from Coral Triangle in Southeast Asia countries. China is a major consumer. So how to solve this huge challenge, how to address this challenge? We have a choice of, working with 6.9 billion consumers. It's not feasible. We can do something. Maybe we can change a little bit of, habitat of each individual consumers, but, it's not a very effective way to address the issue. We can work with, 1.5 billion producers globally. It's also not very easy. It's not very effective. So finally, WWF decided to work with the companies who trade and process a lot of commodities. We selected top 500 companies, which actually deal with 70% of those major commodities trade globally. And among those 500, we selected 100 multinational companies to really work with them. And all those companies circled by red already signed an MOU with WWF to work on sustainability of their company's production. Within 2 years, we've signed 47 contract with 47 companies. In the next 2 years, we are planning to finish contracting with all 100 companies to improve their sustainability. And we believe this is doable and this is most effective way. Since Keith already talked a lot about forest trade and sustainable forest management issues, I'm not going to repeat. But timber trade is one of the major commodities. China has a pivotal role, and we have to promote more responsible trade of timber and forest products. WWF and the Forest Trade and a few other international NGO formed a alliance called Global Forest and Trade Network. We call it GFTN, and we recruited 700 global companies committed to improve their sustainability. And those companies sign up with GFTN only trade timbers and forest products from legal source. And in China, there are 70 companies already joined our GFTN network. And currently, we already worked with one of the largest timber company, Chinese timber company called Sanli, operating in Africa, to go for FSC certification. So this is a good parallel project we start. And I would like to figure out, this is not only about forest, it's about habitat for a lot of lovely, wildlife species. China has been importing a lot of timber from Russia, and this is a critical habitat for tiger, which we care so much about. It's going distinction. So we believe that we have to work with China and many other countries, especially consuming countries like US and EU, and also producing countries like Congo, Amazon, and so on and so forth, to resolve those issues. So far, we have launched those two initiatives only for 2 years, but we have been making some good progress. Every little step counts, we really believe. So this is a photo of our global team gathered in Beijing July this year. We have about 20 people working in Beijing, and then some people working in Africa, some people working in Europe, and we have my department in the U.S. have 50 staff full-time working on market transformation initiatives. 50. So globally, WWF has maybe about 100 staff working on those two initiatives, and we believe we can make a difference. As I said, those are examples of some achievement we're making on this. You will see some report. I really would like to highlight this report we produced. Every 2 years, WWF work with CCICED, which is a very high-ranking Chinese think tank affiliated with the Ministry of Environment and also State Council, called China Center for International Collaboration on Environment and Development. And we produce this report on ecological footprint in China. The first one, this one was published in 2008. For the number in 2005, and this month we issued the second report.
Is it online?
For 2008. It's online. Yes, it's online. And this report has been used by State Council of China and also NDRC for 5-year planning practices. As you know, NDRC developed 5-year plan for China, and that's a very, very critical plan to influence. And we want to help NDRC to integrate those key indicators of ecological footprint and also help develop measures to monitor the footprint reduction achievement in the future. So that's a major achievement. At the same time, on the above those two books, we translated some best international practices from Western countries on financing industry, and then work with Chinese Bank, People's Bank of China, their research institute, to explore the feasibility of introducing those best practices to China. At the same time, early this year, we launched WWF and the People's Bank of China actually launched a forum called Forum on Finance, Environment and Development. And this is a platform in Beijing to get all the players for development and environment get together to discuss about sustainability issues. And during the Shanghai Expo, the World Expo in Shanghai this year, WWF Expo exhibition actually introduced ecological footprint concept to the public. So this photo shows a mother and son using our footprint calculator to see how much footprint every day their life is imposing on Earth. And then we also teach people how to reduce their individual footprint, some tips there. Sorry. So that's all I have, and I hope it's helpful for you. Thank you.
Thank you. All woven together here. And now the time has come for some, you guys to ask some questions. Cushing, you have a microphone, so raise your hand if you have questions. I mean, these are fabulous presentations. And they're stunned. Okay, can you hand me that mic there, Swana? Sure. Since I'm closer. So Cushing doesn't have to do like Herculean leaps over the audience.
I'm always happy to ask a dumb question and get you people started, but maybe it's not so dumb. I'd like to know,
Rose?
The Cambodia person, Susanna.
Suwana.
How do you have influence with the government there? It sounded as though, I get them to do this and I propose that. And why do they pay attention to you?
Oh, it's a labor of love. It started on day one. We just basically, it's our approach, how we do things. We work with the government in a collaborative manner. We bring problems to them. I think our method is we have aerial surveys that we do very frequently. So we fly over an area. Our areas are always the same. It's not random. We collect GIS data, photography, then we put that together in a report. We go on the ground, we find who's the culprit for each land encroachment or logging. We suggest a solution, and then we bring it to the right person, and we ask them what they want to do about it. And then we say, and of course we're ready to help you in whatever you need. So then we follow up with it's usually a problem between national government and subnational government. So we do the liaison between national and subnational to make sure that the national policies are implemented. And another thing that it's very psychological, central government, including the Prime Minister, they want to see their initiatives, policies, declarations, and laws being implemented. So when they see that it's not being implemented, it makes them angry. And so you can use that constructively to help them put people in line. And that's usually what we do. So. Yeah.
And you've lived there for 10 years, so you've built
Yes.
up a lot of trust.
Yes. Everything is respect and trust. And I can challenge any one of them and go and say, you know what? I understand this, but really this is not okay. So what can we do about it?
And how many people do you have on the ground in Cambodia?
250, including the rangers. And they're not our rangers, they're government rangers, but we support them and equip them and train them. And we have foreigners working with them to assure good governance.
But how many are Wildlife Alliance staff? Well, you're
53.
an alliance. You're an alliance.
Well, we're 53 Wildlife Alliance staff and 197 government counterparts, but on the ground.
That's cool. I like that. Okay, and also speakers, if you have questions for each other too, I won't stop you. So out here, we got a question over here. Wait for the mic to meander over.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Virginia, just like the state. Virginia Cutchin. Thank you. I applaud and admire your work. I wondered what evidence you see of popular response, like individual response. For instance, we all think this is important. How many of us are living it? I have solar panels on my house, and I'm 95% solar most of the time. So I'm wondering if any of you do see, individual response to the initiatives that you're trying to implement at a government level. Thank you.
Because ultimately, we are consuming the stuff that China produces, right? At our Walmarts and whatnot. Yeah. Okay. So, any of you have any thoughts on that? Because Rose had that chart that said the consumers. There are a lot of us.
So I will answer the question from my perspective. Actually, first of all, our first initiative does address introducing some green technology like renewable energy affordable for Africans. We are planning to work with China Development Bank using some of their foreign aid funding to introduce those affordable Chinese renewable energy technologies to African countries. And I believe this can help African countries to alleviate their energy poverty and at the same time help those individuals. And in terms of solar heating and solar PVs, it's very popular in China, especially in the provinces where I lived before, Yunnan provinces. Maybe 90% of the families in the city and maybe 50% of the families in the rural areas use solar heater and, small hydro technologies and so on and so forth. And also in terms of trade and also China's role, I really think like Walmart source 78% of the products from China to be sold to the U.S. So a lot of, those cheap Chinese-made goods are benefiting a lot of American consumers. But I think the price China paid is high because China is in a very low part of the value chain of the global economy, and China's environment is destroyed to produce those cheap consumer goods, right?
But it's also further down the chain. It's other countries are destroying.
Further down the chain. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was curious, does Asia Pulp and Paper, do you think you can get them to sign an agreement with you? That would be a victory.
Well, actually, when I was in TNC, I don't want to take too long, but I did work with Chinese Yunnan provincial government to get APP out of Yunnan. They had a huge plan to take over 43 million. I forget the maybe of forest land in southern part of Yunnan to plant eucalyptus for their mills. And so many NGOs fight with that. And
Greenpeace took them to task.
Yeah, and governor of Yunnan called a lot of meetings, which I was invited, and we fight over and over, and finally that project basically has to be shrinked into much smaller size.
But then they moved to Hainan.
They moved to Hainan where not very many NGOs are active there.
Yeah, see, those rabble-rousers in Yunnan kept him out. Okay, some other that was Rose. So a question right here. I can hand you the mic. I'm pretty close. There you go. Thanks.
Two questions, actually. One is the biodiversity COP is going on right now in Japan, and I'm just wondering how China is presenting its record on biodiversity conservation, or whether the land grab and all of these issues with respect to resource extraction are being vetted in an international forum. And my second question is with respect to the downstream impacts of all of this river regulation in the Mekong River Basin, downstream in Vietnam, which we know is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. We expect with a 1 meter sea level rise to lose, I forget how many millions of people in that area. Now, when you don't have sediment coming down the rivers to, basically replenish the sediment supply that is being eroded by longshore currents, and with sea level rise, you're going to, in fact, augment the problem and create, tremendous pressure on that coastal delta area. So is anybody thinking more globally about these impacts? I mean, international waters law should make it illegal to have this type of river regulation without consultation downstream. And if we are concerned about adaptation in the Mekong Delta, we really have to look very carefully about these investments in damming the rivers upstream.
Sure.
On the Mekong River Delta, let me go back to Rose because you're from Yunnan province. And I have heard here at CEF people talking about sustainable energy by building more dams on the rivers that flow down from Tibet through Yunnan province and that feed the Mekong River. Now, I've heard that there are consultations between the Southeast Asian countries and China on the possibility of cutting off their water supply by China and hopefully averting that by building dams for sustainable energy for Chinese communities. Could you elaborate on the whole Mekong River problem?
Keith, do you want to go first?
Keith, you're the one getting the PhD.
Well, I don't follow hydropower issues too closely, but Vietnam is also building their own dams in Cambodia and Laos, so it's a problem of collective action, I suppose. But yeah,
So the Vietnamese are building dams upstream that's impacting the
Yes, in Laos and in Cambodia.
So it's just mind-boggling, yeah.
There's different sets of...
Yeah.
There's different sets of national and subnational interests which are working at odds with each other a lot of the times, and the Mekong River Commission doesn't have any decision-making capability, so it's up to the regional governments to enter into some form of arrangements around these issues. In terms of, one of the basic issues is just getting more information on the river flows associated with the Chinese upstream dams. Getting that basic information shared with downstream members is one of the key issues that people have been working on. So it's at that sort of level of basic information sharing at the moment, I think. So, Suwana?
No, I don't. I'm not a specialist in hydropower dams by any means. I just know what's going on in Cambodia. And what I can say is a lot of water shortages that we're experiencing right now are blamed on the climate change. Other water shortages are blamed on dams upstream in the Mekong. But what I can see in the field, and this is mounting evidence from other NGOs together with us, is that deforestation is the main cause for water shortage. So it's a local change in local environment causing a local water shortage, and also dams of another nature, which is diversion of water for individual agriculture purposes. So my knowledge is more agrarian and more local, so I don't have the macro picture of that.
I can add from WWF perspective, answering to your question, and then I will go to your COP meeting thing. WWF has been working with Mekong countries on really create integrated river basin management plan, and currently we are working with most of the lower Mekong countries, but we are trying our best to engage Yunnan province in China. And currently we are discussing MOU with Huaneng company, which is the only dam company building all the 8 dams in upper reach of Mekong. We want to work with them and introduce environment flow and other sustainable hydropower development methodologies. We are making some good progress, but this is a very political and very sensitive issues, and technically also very complex. So we need a lot of experts from different areas to work with us, and we only make a very small initial progress on this. But I have to say, as a resident from upper reach of 4 big rivers in Asia, I came from 3 parallel rivers region in Yunnan. And unfortunately, a lot of lower Mekong countries complain China, blame China for the drought they are having. But China itself this year encountered maybe the biggest drought, especially Yunnan, which doesn't happen in 100 years. And a lot of farmers lost their crops. Unfortunately and unfortunately, China is in the upper reach of Mekong, and China needs to feed its population. So I really believe with Keith and Sawana that, information sharing, really will play a critical role to achieve, integrated river basin management goal. But politically, it's all about national interest at the end of the day.
But the whole basin.
Every whole
country
basin.
is
We are talking about a whole basin.
Yeah,
whole basin. So exchange of information, and also, engaging a lot of local stakeholders is the key for success. That's my answer. And then about COP, I don't know much about China's plan. But China signed the Biodiversity Convention, CBD, and I know the head of Chinese delegation will go with a good plan, because actually when I was in TNC, we spent 3 years to help Ministry of Environment Protection Agency to develop its national action plan on biodiversity conservation, which will effect from 2010 to 2030. So it's long-term action plan already approved by State Council.
How about its influence overseas?
But its overseas influence, I think it's a new challenge and new issues for Chinese government, and I really don't think those issues will be integrated vast into the commitment for CBD yet. But we should work with them in the future to consider those.
I actually wanted to ask Xiaomei, because she gave the little primer and didn't really talk much about, because she's actually moving into the, I love IFI, the International Financial Flows and Environment Project at WRI. Can you just say a couple of words about, I think that, because what is that project going to do?
Right.
With China, yeah.
Oh, our project actually look at China's investment overseas. Don't actually do anything in China, but we will engage with major financial sectors and major investors in China. Also, the sectors we will focus on is more energy related instead of agriculture or forestry sectors. And in terms of geographic centers, the focus we want to focus on, one is Africa, second is Latin America, because China has really lots of influence in those countries, in those regions. And talk about the dam, I want to provide some policy background in terms of this, because in China, the Chinese government has this mandatory renewable energy components inside every power generator's energy output every year. Huanen, which is China's top power generator, and most of the power comes from coal-fired power generation. And hydropower is considered renewable energy in China. And for all those coal-fired power generators, according to government's current target, at least 5% of your power generation should come from renewable energy. And wind, solar, it's still not a major renewable energy source. So hydro is the main source, and they have to work on that in order to meet government's mandatory targets. That's a policy background everyone has to understand in terms of the issues.
And get a mic. Oh, you have to get a mic, sorry.
One quick comment on the dam building. So the vast majority of China's CDM credits actually have come from dam building. So something to think about when you think about global cap and trade and where those credits are coming from and the other ecological impacts that has. Two questions really quick. One for Xiaomei. Do you have any idea of the percentage of OFDI from China that does not go through the official channels? Because, of course, all the larger SOEs and then development aid would go through official channels. But then what do you have any idea of what percentage of OFDI is bypassing the official channels and just going directly into Africa and Southeast Asia, et cetera? And then the other question is regarding contracts, and more for Suana, I think. Do you have any idea of how the private entities that go in and get forest concessions, what their contracts look like with the local governments, and do they have international arbitration provisions within them of any kind of, if they have disputes, what are the dispute resolution mechanisms within those contracts?
I have no idea what percentage of the investment don't go through official procedure. But as far as I know, no matter which country you go to, China's investors always has to register at local economic and commercial council of that embassy, Chinese embassy, which is a section of Chinese embassy in their country. They have to register there in order to get permit from local governments, from local countries' governments. So I think probably a larger percentage of them is going through official procedure, but I cannot guarantee, and I don't have number to back up my statement.
But that is a question that at some point someone needs to find out, because
Right.
I mean, we had a chap here last year talking about copper mining in the Congo, and it was just like guys would say, it was the Wild West, like, hey, let's go do copper smelting, and and they would just get up and go, and he told stories that the local, the Chinese consulate commercial guy was like, whatever, just that there wasn't really, they had no information on the environment, and they were just like, yeah, it's good, bring more in. And so, I mean, these people are like in the outback and in no way, shape, or form trained to talk about environment. They just let anything in. Was the story that we got?
We will focus on. We hope to answer. Yes.
Swan? Or
yes. To my knowledge, I've seen only 3 contracts to date. I've seen 1 economic land concession contract, 1 mining exploration contract, and 1, I guess you could call it economic land concession. They sold a mountain to a hotel developer, which was a national park before. I have not seen in any of those contracts a provision for international arbitration. And these are fairly simple contracts. It's kind of in between a contract and a sub-decree. It's heavily imprinted with Cambodian law. You know, it must abide by the laws of Cambodia. Ex-ministry is still in charge, etc.
Keith, I think you might have some comments on this too.
It's generally the same situation in Laos, I think. I've only seen one or two company contracts for a land project before, and GTZ has been trying to build up the ability or the capacity of the Lao state to be able to enter into, some sort of more formalized contract arrangements. But, recently the national regulator, the National Land Management Agency, in their survey of one province of all of the concessions, I think they were only able to find for a huge amount of the total number of about 250 concessions, for maybe about a third of them, they could not find any documentation whatsoever. So, and it's an issue of, it's an issue of competitions between different levels of government often. The central, the provincial, and the local governments are all signing contracts with investors, and they don't really have an interest in, a lot of the times, in documenting things.
And Keith, I wanted to ask you, because I know stories from Liz Economy at the Council of Foreign Relations did a lot of work on forestry, Chinese forestry imports from Russia. And some of the stories that she gathered was that in Russia, the case is that the forestry bureaus they're kind of low on the totem pole in terms of government power, and that a lot of the timber concessions and trees sold was that these people out in the Russian Far East, they're hungry. They need to feed their families, and so they cut these deals. Do you think that something similar is happening in Laos? That when you just mentioned about the local officials signing these contracts, I mean, is this corruption? Is this just local entrepreneurship, or?
No, it's corruption. Yeah, they shouldn't be signing.
Yeah, I just want to make
there's regulations around this. I don't think villagers are not signing contracts usually, although they might sort of make bargains. But it would usually be, especially the provinces in Laos are often the most powerful actors in the countryside. So. It's usually often the provincial governments which are doing this.
I would say the same thing for Cambodia. There are regulations that limit the power of the provincial government to give more than 2,000 hectares of land concession, and some provincial governors totally ignore that and give up to 6,000 or 7,000. Now, because of these excesses, there's no more authority of provincial governors to give anything at all. So all the contracts are with central government, and there's no contract with local villagers.
Is that effective?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
No, I mean, it sounds like, because I've heard more that, so it sounds like in Cambodia that besides Wildlife Alliance that there are other NGOs working there trying to, are there other groups? A
lot of groups are working on human rights and the evictions from the economic land concessions. Very few groups are working on the environmental impacts of the economic land concessions. We're one of the only ones.
Yeah. What about, do you guys work in Laos?
We don't.
Not yet?
Not yet, no.
Yeah. Is there anyone in Laos that comes anywhere close to Wildlife Alliance, Keith? In terms of trying to work, with the local governments and the villagers? I mean, you were there studying it.
I think international NGOs are a little bit more restricted in their operations in Laos. There's a little bit less political freedom for some of the big environmental groups to actually work closely on the ground, and those that do have to be a little bit more careful in terms of their relations with the Lao government. So it's a little bit more restrictive, I think, compared to Cambodia.
Okay. Maybe we've got time for maybe one quick question out here. Anything? We got way in the back. We always get the guy. You were at my meeting yesterday, right? And he asked the last question yesterday, too. This is kind of creepy. You're my closing pitcher once again. And tell us your name.
Sobat Sung from Voice of America Cambodian Service. I just had a question, I guess, to all the panelists about apparently Chinese companies are becoming more socially environmentally responsible. What do you see as the trend? And my kind of related question is about regional investors. So I guess Savannah and Keith could also talk about this. How environmentally and socially responsible have been investors from Thailand and Vietnam, and how do you think they can be?
So it's maybe there's whether or not there's a trend of Chinese companies being a bit greener. I have a feeling that.
Well, there's this new Chinese regulation on the operations of silviculture abroad through the State Forestry Agency. I'd be interested in, these are guidelines. I'd be interested if Xiao Mei could maybe comment on, is there any real bite to these guidelines, or are they just sort of recommendations, or is there some, penalty associated with not meeting the guidelines for Chinese forestry operations investing overseas? Maybe you might comment on that. But, that's one interesting initiative. I haven't really seen anything substantive out of this in the last 2 years since it was announced. But it's a step, I suppose. In terms of the Thai and Vietnamese investors and their it's a mixed bag, I suppose. It's hard to pin down. There are a couple of them that are sort of following the legal framework, at least the minimum legal framework. Registering their concession with the appropriate levels of government and following impact assessments and things like that. Most of them are not, and a lot of them are doing sort of special side deals. There's one high-profile Vietnamese case where a Vietnamese company got access to 10,000 hectares of land in southern Laos in exchange for building the athletes' village in Vientiane for the Southeast Asian Games. So these sort of, sort of deals, land for infrastructure development. These are often how the way things are working right now.
Where did the trees since you said they were the Thailand and Vietnam were the biggest cutters of the trees in Laos?
Natural forest.
Natural forest. Sorry. Where's that timber go?
Vietnam is a major wood furniture exporter. One of the top after China, I think. So it's coming to North America, it's coming to Europe, it's coming to Australia, as well as within East Asia. So,
Yeah. So it sounds like
it doesn't end in Vietnam, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have anything to say about the guidelines?
We can talk.
Okay. After. Okay. Yeah. Rose and Swana. Swana first.
After you.
Okay.
After you.
See, there's a question. It was like a domino effect up front here. Yes.
I actually have a comment. It's not completely. It's perhaps related to what you just said, in terms of the timber and the chain of value, etc. Going through a general comment about China's footprint and our global footprint. There's a lot of talk. In order to mitigate global climate change, that we have to focus on innovative energy technologies. And I agree to some measure, but I think it clouds the issue, because the main disaster that's happening right now is deforestation. And while we're focusing on these green energies, and China is now leading the way, or going to be leading the way, the tragedy keeps on going. The timber demand everywhere is the same. We're not reducing our timber demand. We're not creating alternative sustainable forestry. It will take years for these tech trees and construction wood trees to grow. In Cambodia, there's almost nothing as an alternative. And I heard from Peter, that there's 900,000 cubic meters of wood leaving Cambodia every year. Is that correct?
It's around 300.
300,000 cubic meters. That's an enormous volume of trees and forests going away. And if you add to that all the economic land concessions where the forest is being converted to pulp and paper or other agriculture uses. So we're actually not addressing the issue of timber. And timber is deforesting our planet, and our freshwater reserves have shrunk from 3%, which is the normal freshwater content of our planet Earth, to 1.5%. So there's a looming disaster there, and water shortages are everywhere. And I would really urge everyone to look at the issue from that perspective. Deforestation is really the main problem that we're facing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Even worse from Indonesia.
In Indonesia, it's all over.
It's all over, yeah.
Rose, did you have any?
Yeah, I just
final
want
comment?
to respond to the question that gentleman asked about the trend on CSR in China. Yes, I think it's emerging, and it's awareness and action taken by Chinese companies on CSR is enormous, actually. And according to the regulations the State Council has on state-owned companies, it's mandatory for all those state-owned companies to have a CSR report. And even many private companies now is having their CSR. I know that there is a Green Entrepreneurial Club talking a lot about those CSRs. But the key issues is the implementation and monitoring and enforcement of those environment policies and regulations. So I think Chinese government need to work with other country government to implement those guidelines and recommendations and really monitor through local capacity, because I don't think Chinese government has the capacity to monitor the behaviors and impact of Chinese investment overseas.
Okay, on that note, you can tell, well, first applaud them. Yay. We're just scratching the surface, but I think we did it much. This is my third meeting on this topic. I feel like it's much more effective now that I'm getting a better grasp on what's going on, and you guys are doing great work. And I kind of hope that there can be a little bit of networking happening amongst your groups here, because I think they could all mutually help each other. Thank Vermont Law School and USAID for letting me take this exploration, and thank all of you for coming. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
That was great. This is the best meeting I've had on this topic yet. No, because again, your case studies put in the bigger picture.
We all fit together.
And you all fit together. It was kind of like, but it grew very organically. It was you, then Keith, and then I was looking around. Because I was also talking, it was
I'm really glad to be able to come. I'm really appreciate the
Yes.
outside your ordinary.
report back to our colleagues in China.
Okay, well, we actually do a lot of.
I've heard of them, yes.
There's a guy, he goes, Doug Nolan, he bounces between California and D.C. But he has a big focus on ECAs globally. And they do a lot of China. So we're probably going to get, I'll probably have the next meeting, we'll be talking more about the XMs and ECAs. What? Yeah, because I think that because I'm trying to, and we're hoping, and we've got some more research briefs coming down the line, because I just really feel like it's so complicated. And again, thanks for the inspiration for complex connections, Keith. Because because you're doing all your work, but I had a feeling that you were learning things from the other speakers.
I'm learning from everybody. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, because it is so complex, and you